Take a girl and a guy, and they fall madly in love and form a family. Sprinkle in some counseling degrees and a doctorate, a dream of transforming relationships as we know it. And 20 years later, we give you power couple Dr. Ray and Jean Kadkodian. And this is Couples Synergy.
Hi everyone, it's Jean Kadkodian and Dr. Ray Kadkodian.
How you doing?
And we've been meditating together for about 25 days now, and we just wanted to talk a little bit about what's actually happening in your brain and why meditation is so good for you. So if you've noticed, since we've been sheltering in place, that you're not as busy or as overstimulated as you used to be. I'm hearing that a lot from my clients. Are you hearing that?
Absolutely. That's their structure and the routine is all disrupted, right? So people are trying to adapt to this new norm.
So, think about the stress of just commuting, right? Most of that's been eliminated. I know some of you are still going to work and still have that stress, but for the people who don't, you're noticing a difference in your life. And that's what happens when we don't meditate. So when we're meditating, we don't really notice the benefits, that we feel a little better, calmer, grounded, less anxious. And you don't really notice it until you stop. So it's very similar to working out, right? So if you're working out all the time, you just feel strong and healthy and good in your body. And if you stop working out, over time, you might go up a flight of stairs and be like, oh my God, I'm so out of shape. The same thing happens when we don't meditate.
When we are meditating, it is the exact opposite of anxiety and worry. When we're meditating, we're activating the parasympathetic nervous system. And when we are worrying, it's the sympathetic nervous system. That is where our neurons are firing and we're worrying about so many different things. And once that switch is turned on, it doesn't have a dimmer switch. It either is on or off, and it's designed, once it's on, to continue to, look around for threats. And you don't have to really go very far in today's day and age and all of this health crisis to find something to worry about. So meditation is a way of taking your foot off that gas pedal of that anxiety and worry and being able to find that sense of peace and calmness.
So let's talk about the structure of our brain. Our brain actually has developed through a series of evolutionary events. So when the crustaceans first crawled out of the ocean, they just had a hindbrain or reptilian brain. And this part of our brain is very automatic, it's very reactive, and its only concerns are food and safety. So you can see from this picture, the reptilian part of the brain it's the oldest, deepest part of our brain. And this is our part of our brain that reacts when there's trauma.
It is a part of the brain that regulates our heart rate, respiration, blood pressure, perspiration, digestion, everything that's just completely automated in our body is regulated here in this part of the brain.
There's one thing that's also regulated here that is also regulated in another part of your brain, and that's breathing. So this part of your brain that keeps you breathing, whether you think about it or not, is the reptilian automatic part. And that's the part that's going to change based on your perception of threat, right? But it also has a connection to another part of the brain. So after the reptilian brain was, let me say that different. When a baby is in utero, this is the first part of the brain that develops. And that's why when you see an ultrasound, babies can startle, they can do that, right? Because this part of the brain is functioning. And then our brain, once we're born, the myelin sheaths continue to make those connections all the way up until, what is it, like 25, when the prefrontal cortex is fully
online, right? Yep. So it develops in that progression: spinal cord, reptilian brain, emotional mammalian brain, and then into the prefrontal cortex, which is right here behind our forehead.
So through a process of evolution, the second part of our brain that developed is our limbic system, and what we kind of loosely call our emotional brain. And the limbic system has a component to it that mammals have. So they sometimes call it the mammalian brain. So if you have a dog and you walk in the house, your dog's going to try and get your attention, right? They're going to be like, hi, you're home. And they want you to pet them and just acknowledge them. And once you do that, they kind of go about their business, do whatever they want. But if you don't do that, they become very anxious because mammals need to attach. And so we're not any different, right? And so when we don't have human connection, when we don't have touch, when we are not acknowledged, when we are left out, we get anxious and we get depressed.
This part of the brain, the emotional brain, it developed for survival. We have emotions first before we have thought. And the reason why we have that, it's a very quick system, is to help us survive. If we didn't have fear, our species would have died out a long time ago. We would have walked off cliffs, right? If we don't have worry, then our species again would have died off a long time ago, because we would need worry to prepare for winter months. We would need worry to prepare for any other, threats that are out in our environment. So each emotion developed for a particular reason, and each of those reasons, each of those emotions are there for us to survive as a species. It's a very quick system. It happens before we even think about it, and it has to be, right? If you think about a bear jumping out of their bushes, you have to be able to respond to that before you even know what it is.
So this part of our brain, the limbic system and the reptilian, is all part of the subconscious part of our brain, the very automatic part. And there's two important characteristics of this part of us. And the first one is that there is no relationship to time, which means that the first time you touched a stove, you actually got burned because you didn't know what it was. And then even if 30 years goes by, if you come near that stove again, your hand's going to pull away without thinking, because it's never going to forget that experience. And then it does something else. It generalizes. And generalizes and says, don't touch that stove, but don't touch any stove. And don't touch anything that feels like that. So don't touch a flame, don't touch a tailpipe or curling iron, anything that you feel that heat sensation, pull your hand away. And this happens automatically, and it remembers everything.
Those memories, those emotional memories, are designed so that they don't degrade. If we have a cognitive or logical memory, about a procedure, about how to go about doing something, those things we forget over time. But an emotional memory, because it is designed to help us survive, it is designed to remain there and not degrade.
And then the final process of evolution developed the neocortex, or the prefrontal cortex.
Well, part of the neocortex is the prefrontal cortex. That was the last part of the last part of the brain to develop, and that's right behind the forehead.
And this is our place of logic and reason and contemplation and problem solving, and this is how we create, right? So if you look at this picture, you see all that blue, right? And just a little bit of red and a little bit of brown. Well, the red and the brown are actually 85% of our reactions to everything. The blue's only about 15. So if you think about an iceberg, the little bit that's above the water is what's happening right now, but it's sitting on 85% of history. And so when you have an emotion, you feel it 100%. So if you ever see someone that seems to have a very strong emotional reaction to something that seems out of place, it's because of this. We call those iceberg moments, right? So our brain was developed to, first and foremost, stay alive physically. And so if you think about a deer in a meadow, and she's eating some grass, and she looks up and she sees the wolf. Well, instantly her body is going to send out signals and hormones that are going to help her survive. So she's going to get a burst of adrenaline and start running away. She's going to get some other chemicals, some cortisol, that's going to start shutting down things in her body not needed for immediate survival. If she's digesting food, if she's ovulating, if she's repairing cells, all that stops, because it doesn't matter if you're dead. And all that energy gets directed to running away and getting safe.
pretty much all non-essential functions within the body shut down in order to deal with that impending threat. Now, if a person goes through the threats or anxiety over a long period of time, our body adjusts to that too, producing a lot more of cortisol. And that cortisol does also serve the same function of shutting down non-essential functions in the body, shunting all the resources to dealing with the threat, which can have long-term effects.
So once the deer gets away and there's the all clear, right? There's no more danger. Her body goes back to her original homeostasis through the parasympathetic nervous system. Very similar to like when the firemen come out and they go through the building, they say, all clear, danger's over, go back to doing what you're doing. Our problem is we're typically not being chased by wolves. Our reactions to potential threats are much more emotional. And so like Dr. Ray was saying, when there's prolonged stress because you don't know where the threat is or when it ends, then it sort of just hovers in that place. And this is where the real damage happens over time. This is why we gain weight when we're stressed. This is why we want to drink and eat pizza and ice cream and do some other unhealthy behaviors.
Exactly. You know, when I was saying earlier that there isn't a difference on worry or anxiety, it's either on or off. You know, when we don't have threats like a wolf or a bear, our worry and anxiety will just project that onto anything else. It'll be bills. It will be making the meeting on time. You know, it will be doing whatever you need to do in order to continue that worry. Sorry.
There we go.
There you go. We're back.
So if you think about the very first time you drove a car, when you first drive a car, you drive it with your mind, with your thinking, because you haven't had the physical experience yet. And so the first time you step on the gas pedal, it's a really unsettling feeling. Woo, well, you know, this whole big thing's moving. And then you step on the brake and you're like, because you're trying to figure it out with your body, what your mind knows about how to drive a car. And then the more you drive the car, the more your body is driving the car. And so for most of us that have been driving, you know, for a very long time, it's kind of effortless and thoughtless for the most part, because the part of our brain that's automatic is driving the car. And if there's a potential threat, your foot is going to find the brake long before you think about it. So the same thing's happening in our body when we're worried, is that our body is running the show. And then, go ahead.
And our brain is adjusting to that worry as well. You know, neurons are restructuring themselves, rebuilding, and creating a new norm within the brain. The new norm being constant anxiety.
Right. And so there's a feedback loop that happens between the brain and the body where, you know, if the body feels some tension in it, the brain goes, oh, something must be wrong. And then it goes on alert, and then the body goes, yee. And we get stuck in this, because when it's an emotional thing, there's no real way to determine if you're safe or not. And so I really want you to focus on that when the next time you feel anxiety, is literally ask yourself, am I starving to death? Am I freezing to death? Am I about to fall off a cliff? Is a bear chasing me? If there's a no to all those answers, then try to tell yourself that you're safe, because it's all in this emotional part of us. So a little bit more anatomy, we'll talk about the vagus nerve, right? So the vagus nerve runs from that brainstem all the way down our spine. And there's a bundle of nerves in our gut, in our heart, in our lungs, and in our brain that are all connected to this vagus nerve. And this vagus nerve is the primal part of us that responds to everything. And this is why when we're stressed, we get headaches, panic attacks, and stomach problems. And that's that vagus nerve acting and saying, hey, you're in trouble, you're in trouble, you're in trouble. When for the most part, you're not in trouble. However, depending on what life was like when you were growing up, and all of us have human parents and all of us had things we've gone through in our lives, we learn to respond in a certain way. And there's only really 3 ways that we respond, right?
Fight, flight, or freeze.
Yep.
And this is governed by the amygdala, which is a gland in the brain that is between the limbic system and the prefrontal cortex. It is this conduit between the two of them, and it dictates our survival in the response in only those three ways. And the brain acts as this main communication center. And the vagus nerve acts as this booster of that signal, sending it out throughout our entire body.
And so when we experience a potential threat, oftentimes we'll freeze up. That's a really common response, especially if it's someone that's overpowering us or a situation we can't really control, like if our boss is not very nice to us, or someone that's sort of in control of us. We don't have anywhere to go. We have to like sort of sit and tolerate it. And that's that, reptilian part of our brain that, if you ever see a lizard, it just does that, right? Unless it can jump and then it runs away. And you see this in all, bunnies and deers and everything. The other thing that we can do is we can fight, and a lot of times the fighting is probably something you're going to do with someone you're really close to.
It's protective and defensive in nature.
Yep. Because you can't just go around beating people up, because you'll probably have a bigger problem, right? And so, when our brain is kind of stuck in that fight, flight, or freeze mode, it's really difficult for us to come out of it. And that's usually what people experience as anxiety, because that energy has to go somewhere, because energy, the nature of it is constant motion. So it comes in and just sort of swirls. And that's what you feel here. And now we can talk about the other part of our brain that is more conscious, that is also capable of breathing. And this is why the breath is so important when we're talking about meditation. And I want to put meditation into a little bit of context. There is really only one goal of meditating. And that goal is to become an observer of yourself.
It's not to clear your mind.
That's a byproduct.
I think most people think that that's what you're supposed to do when you meditate. And that's why people get very frustrated when they start meditating. It is impossible to clear your mind. And so this is really the goal, becoming an observer of yourself and being able to separate yourself from your mind.
And that's why guided meditation, and especially group meditation, is so much easier to do, because you're not fighting with yourself in your head. You're sort of allowing someone to guide you into this place, which is really lovely, right? And so if you've been meditating with us, you'll notice on Sundays we do silent meditation, but that Vipassana still has a technique to it that keeps your mind flowing in a certain direction instead of sort of ruminating, which is what our mind likes to do, which is why we want to distract ourselves with pizza and beer. So when you're meditating, if you notice you have a lot of thoughts, you're still meditating. If you notice you're antsy and wiggly and don't want to sit still, you're still meditating. And the thing that's most important about that is there's no such thing as a passive observer.
Keep in mind, what we were talking about with the brain. The brain is designed to seek out and look for threats. It is designed to look back into the past to try to learn from mistakes that were made. And so that is that natural tendency for your brain, especially trying to meditate, to jump into the future and then jump back into the past. Okay, don't get discouraged because you can't keep your mind still. Right? That is what we're talking about here, is being able to, become an observer, see your mind jumping back and forth, and then learning to tune inward.
If you think about it and you look around the room that you're in right now, and maybe you'll see a chair or a lamp or a TV, your laptop or your phone. And if you ask yourself, am I the chair? Am I the phone? Am I the lamp? Of course you're not. Well, then who are you? Well, you're the one observing that. So when you meditate, you're observing your thoughts. And our thoughts, they have to keep moving. They're constantly scanning and searching and looking. And that's a really good thing for us to be able to do, except when we become that. We think we are anxiety, or we are depressed, we are that thing. No, we're the one experiencing that, or we're observing that. So when you're observing yourself, what is being observed has to change. It might get better, it might get worse, but it will change, right? That's a Vipassana concept too.
Absolutely. We've been practicing meditation for many years, and there are days that it's just too difficult to do, right? It is a practice. It is something that has to be repeated over and over and over again. And you're only as good as you are in that present moment.
You know, if you think about working out, right? If you work out very consistently, you don't feel the same every time you work out. Some days you feel really energized and strong and like you can, you know, do way better than your personal best. Other days you're just dragged. You're like, ugh, this feels like just a big chore, like I'm filled with cement right now. Meditation is the same way.
Absolutely.
Doesn't mean you're doing it wrong. If you are observing yourself, you're doing it right. So the only wrong way to meditate is to not meditate, right? And so what happens is when we start to observe, we naturally will regulate our breathing. And if you remember us talking about that fight, flight, or freeze response, the very first thing that happens is a disruption in our feedback loop between our lungs and our heart. So our heart rate in our lungs, when they're in sync, that's the parasympathetic nervous system that's saying, all clear, everything's fine. I'm not stressed out. There's no threats in my life right now. I can digest my food and repair cells and stay healthy, right?
The reason why we start with the breath in meditation is because it is the direct connection between the conscious and subconscious mind. The breath is just going to function on its own without us thinking about it. But we could also tune into our breath, hold it. We could control our breath. We can breathe heavy. We can breathe soft, you know, and that's the conscious control of it. And so all meditation starts there as the first part.
If you want more information about how you are doing within your body in terms of your stress response, count your breaths for 1 minute. Not the in and the out, just the in for 1 minute. And wherever you're at, here's what the scale looks like. Our heart likes between 4 and 7 breaths per minute, right? The average American has 12 breaths per minute, and anyone over 16 breaths has an anxiety problem. And that's a really good thing to know about yourself, because the very first thing you can do, especially first thing in the morning, because our emotional brain doesn't really activate until later in the afternoon, which is why the evenings are so much more filled with crime, right? That's when people fight and, you know, are irritable. It's much more in the evening than in the morning. So in the morning, when that's calm and you start breathing and you learn to feel that comfort and that relaxation, it sets your day off very differently. I don't know if you've ever had the experience where you woke up shockingly, and Ray did this to me because he set his alarm clock to screaming goats. And then you wake up and it sounds like a human being being tortured. You're like, ah! You know, and that sets a tone for your day as well. And this is why, you know, the earlier in the day that you can meditate, the easier it is to do and the more beneficial it is throughout the rest of the day.
It's much easier to start it off than to end your day that way, because by the end of the day, you've collected a lot of, you know, obligations and threats and stress and everything. And so it will make it much more difficult to meditate. And a lot of times people find themselves just falling asleep, right? And that is really not the purpose of meditation. If you want to sleep, you'll sleep, okay? But meditation is staying in that space, in that zone, and really increasing that amount of time where you're observing yourself.
So if you ever have this experience while you're meditating, then you've gotten to some really great place that we call the zone. This is where they refer to this as kairos, which is vertical time, which is that another term for that is the superconscious, right?
These are two Greek words, actually. The Greeks have two words for time, kairos and chronos. And chronos is the time that we all know, and that's like the clock and, you know, the hour and the minute. But kairos was that time that when you're in it, time seems to stop. And everything, you're in this eternal moment.
You know, maybe you've had a time where you're doing a hobby or you're having a great conversation with someone that you really like, and then you look up and you're like, oh my God, where did the time go? That's Kairos. That is Kairos, and that is one of the byproducts of meditating. And when you're in that place, you feel a lot of peace and you get a lot of really great ideas. And it also helps you shift that reptilian part of your brain because it makes you feel so much safer in the world. And that's really the goal. So, you know, depending on how much trauma has been in your life or how you respond to when things are out of sorts is where your muscle is at in terms of this meditative piece. And that's the part you want to shift. There's a really great YouTube video by Joe Dispenza that we can put a link to that also on our Facebook page.
Wherever this video is posted.
Yeah, we'll add that. And he talks about how, you know, if you can access the operating system, then you can start to shift your bodily, the automatic body sensation you have to a threat, whether it's real or not.
There've actually been some really great studies about meditation. One of them being at Stanford, I believe. Either Stanford or Harvard. So East Coast. Stanford actually is around the East Coast. Anyway, on the East Coast, they did a study with Buddhist monks. And Buddhist monks are able to cover themselves with wet bed sheets and meditate and increase their body temperature to the point that they're able to dry the sheets. So they have so much control over their physiological responses that they can raise their body temperature and lower their body temperature. So there's a very direct connection between our mind, our emotions, and our body.
You know, those people who practice meditation like that practice for hours and hours a day, every day for years and years. So don't get too discouraged. It is something you could develop. We're capable of that, just like we're capable of running a marathon. Although if you went out right now, you'd probably go, I'm not so good at running. If you haven't been working out.
I'm not.
Right? So the that old part of our brain, I want you to think like this. Think that, can you think the thought that you want your heart to stop for 15 seconds and then start again? You could try, but that old part of our brain, the reptilian part that's automatic and making sure we're surviving, is not going to let that happen, right? And so it's the same part of us that feels anxiety. And you might wake up in the morning and just feel a sense of, right? And it's in your body, it's in your cellular memory, and you kind of feel like, what can I do about this? And this is what we mean by getting into that, the operational part of your brain. And so it takes a little bit of work to learn to meditate and to relax, because the amygdala, which is the thing that's governing our fight, flight, or freeze, also governs memory. And so when you are controlling your breathing so that your heart and your lungs are staying in sync, and that's 4 to 7 breaths per minute, the amygdala is going to allow some old memories to come up for healing. And so it's energy, so what comes in has to come out. And that's another great release that we can have through meditation.
Think of it as a reprogramming of your responses to your environment. And think about how old you are and how long you've been responding to threats in the same way, over and over and over again. And each time you responded to those threats in that same way, your brain neurons were connecting and reinforcing those patterns of reaction. And so it will take time to dismantle those neuron connections and rebuild, reprogram, and create new neuron connections, new pathways, new responses to the threats and the anxiety and stressors that we are dealing with on a daily basis. It takes practice.
Mm-hmm. remember I had a client once, and she grew up in Germany during the war. And when she was 2 years old, she heard the air raid sirens, and her family went into their bomb shelter. And when they came out, their house was gone. And she knew where all the bomb shelters were on her way to school and throughout the town, wherever she went, And when she was 18, it was after the war, and she met an American soldier and married him and came back to the United States. And then on Tuesday morning at 10 a.m.,
tornado sirens go off.
she's running down the street. And she's looking around like, where is everybody? And so this very functional behavior that she learned to do that was life-saving now looks really crazy, right? And so those are the things that is kind of the way our brain works. And one thing I want to talk about, since we were talking about time, is our physical body heals in physical time. If you scrape yourself, you're going to wash it off, maybe put a little ointment on it or a Band-Aid, and then you can't stop it. It's just going to heal. But that doesn't happen in our emotional brain. Like Dr. Ray said, our emotional brain has no relationship to time, and it doesn't, what do you say, doesn't degrade, right? And so that stays there until a process of emotional first aid is brought to that situation or that time. So because there's no relationship to time, you can apply emotional first aid at any time to something that happened 20, 30, 40 years ago. Because I can tell you that woman that grew up in Germany, she doesn't run down the streets anymore. She was 72 last time I saw her, which is quite a while ago, but she has learned an adaptive behavior, which is the point of meditation. So you can access that and change your responses and your reactions that are so automatic. The spiritual time is all of time at once. And in the spiritual world, we feel everything, and there doesn't seem to be any process of time. So if you're grieving and the person passed away 10 years ago, it'll feel like it happened right now. That's spiritual time. And our mind, which is what we're using to meditate, is the bridge between the spiritual and emotional worlds. The emotional body is instant. You can't save up happiness to get you through harder times. You're going to feel what you feel right now. And so that's kind of the point. The point of meditation is to be able to access that spiritual place of all time and the emotion of right now, and to find that bridge so we can heal.
So get practicing, because it is going to change your life. It is going to be a very significant part of your life. And it will help you in all facets of your life.
Yeah, it's really something that we can talk about it all we want, but you have to experience it. It's experiential, because your body is going through experiences. That's how it learns. All right, thanks for joining us today, and have a great day, and keep meditating with us.
We'll see you.
You have been listening to Couple Synergy with Dr. Ray and Jean Ketkodian. Couple Synergy was recorded, edited, and produced by Dr. Ray and Jean Ketkodian. Voiceover and music entitled Breathe and Let Go was recorded and composed by Gina Gonzalez.